Hey there, and welcome to the first episode of Checkbox Other. I'm your host, Nikki Innocent. So, since this is the first episode, I figured it would be good to introduce myself, to share who the heck I am, what I am doing in this world, and why I started this podcast in the first place. I felt that the most authentic way to do that would be via a conversation with one of the closest people in my life, my cousin Meghan. Meghan and I aren't related by blood, but I mean, really, what does that even matter? We met at a very young age at a family wedding and automatically clicked. We danced the night away at that wedding, just so you know. It was like we were speaking a different language than everyone else around us our whole lives. And then finally, one day, we met and found someone who spoke that same language too. We call ourselves quote-unquote station twins, which you will hear more about in the episode. I hope you enjoy, and please, if you do, be sure to subscribe. And let's get this thing started. Yeah! Hi, Meg.
Hi, Nikki.
So first, I just want to thank you for being my first podcast guest ever. This podcast adventure has been one that I've been really excited to start, but a little anxious to get things moving. So I want to say an extra thank you to you for trusting me to hop into this arena of the unknown and to, at least for this first one, do it a little bit of a different way, a bit of a reverse interview. So I think the first way to kind of kick this off would be for you to give a quick intro of who you are, what your background is, and then we can dive into some more of the kind of questions that you have for me.
All right, sounds good. So, I grew up in a small town in Vermont with my older sister and my parents, and I had a lovely childhood, and I feel lucky enough to say that my parents provided me with a really solid foundation for my life. I currently live with my very thoughtful and adventurous husband, Ryan, and our gem of a dog, Noni. I'm a therapist and enjoyed my journey of becoming a therapist for almost a decade now, which is crazy to think.
Yeah.
But I graduated from Dickinson College with a BA in psychology and then went on to get my master's in clinical mental health counseling, it's a mouthful, from Antioch University. Right now, I'm working at a school that serves the needs of students with a wide variety of disabilities. But before that, I worked at an outpatient community agency where I got to work with a lot of different people, a lot of different types of people of all different ages who wanted my help in addressing a lot of different concerns. So that was really a unique and fun experience for me. I pride myself in being a genuine and empathetic person while remaining open-minded and curious. And I just have a passion to lead a meaningful life, which I base on my own criteria, not the world's criteria of what might be meaningful. And
Amen.
I know, I find purpose and meaning in helping people to promote their well-being and transcend life's bumps in the road that everybody has, and it's going to come. I guess on a lighter note, I love spending time with those that are closest to me, like you, and being around animals and natures, and of course, a good old quality Netflix binge. Like you can teleport into all these crazy different worlds, which I love.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, come on now. That sounds amazing. Oh, I feel all this love for you when you talk about yourself. I'm like, that's my station twin right there. Oh, I had so much pride. My body's all warm. So just for everyone listening, Meghan and I, we call each other station twins. And that's been something, I mean, Meg, how long have you been calling each other that?
Honestly, it felt like the
12
first week we started. It's been
25?
since we were in 3rd or 4th grade.
Okay. No big deal. Just a hop, skip, and a jump ago. So for us, station twins is something that we just know as kind of common jargon. But what it meant for us as like 8 or 9-year-olds was, I'm going to take my stab. Meg, you feel free to kind of take your stab after if I miss anything.
All right.
We met each other. So Meg and I are cousins. However, we're actually not blood related. So we met each other kind of later in life, and I can personally say that there was a part of me that felt like I was kind of speaking a language that not everybody completely understood until I met you. It's kind of like we got on the same frequency, on the same wavelength, and even like weird facial expressions or weird noises, like we could translate them from each other, even though we never knew each other before.
Right.
And so it kind of felt like what happens when you see twins, like when they're first born or in the womb, where they're really like, they have kind of this telepathic dynamic. And the whole part of it for us was the creative kids we were, that instead of, like in a womb where the twins are there together, that we had the womb before the womb, that there's like
Yep.
this whole universe where we were birthed as twins. And there's this, in my mind, my visual memory is this gas station that these
Kind of like an Easy Pass station right now.
yeah, exactly. That you go down into, and like the twins are there, and then we kind of got separated at birth, which sounds really sad, but we kind of got to the station, and then you got sent to your mom and dad, and I got sent to my mom and dad. And we magically, 8 years later, got matched back up together at a wedding and danced our butts off. So while we don't call each other full-on twins, we think that station twins are even a little bit more deep. So I'm so proud to have you as my station twin. Thank you.
Me too.
Did I hit everything?
I think so. So since I shared a little bit about myself and my background, what's up for you? Where did you come from? What are you up to now?
Oh, where did I come from? So people ask me that all the time. What the heck? How did you get here? No. So my background is, to me, not very unique necessarily. I feel like, when it's your life, it feels like normal. But, I grew up in Connecticut to two wonderful, loving parents. And my father's Black and my mom's white. And so in a biracial household initially. And then when I was 3 years old, my parents got divorced. So kind of had two different households there. Lived pretty close to each other. So both my mom and my dad were very involved in my life, which was great. And I grew up in what I would call an upper middle class town. And I feel very fortunate that I felt like I wasn't really wanting for much. I would never say that I was kind of at the top echelon of the folks in my hometown. I was kind of poor on the level of what was happening there, but in the grand scheme of the world, not even close. And I had such a wonderful, fortunate opportunity to go through some really great educational experiences, both in high school and then in college. I went to school at Bentley College, which is now Bentley University in Massachusetts, studied business, graduated with a marketing degree, and started almost immediately checking off the quote unquote right boxes for my resume. I got a job right out of school, right before the wonderful recession hit in 2008. I had been working for a little over a year at an advertising agency there and was miserable, but stayed. Had to have a job, had to pay the bills, kept doing that. And by the luck of hustle and a wonderful recruiter that came into my life, got a job at a place called Bain & Company. That's a management consulting firm. So moved from more of the creative space to professional services, a little bit, I shouldn't say a little bit, a lot more corporate, and loved the people that I worked with there. Really, really loved the experience that I had, but found myself in that role kind of getting a little bit boxed in after a little while. There wasn't really room for growth, and found a role at another company that sounds very similar called Bain Capital, where I went from a big team of people doing marketing with me to being the only person doing marketing at a private equity investment management firm. So I didn't just work in private equity. If you don't know what private equity is all about, that's okay. I won't go too deep into it because that is not what this podcast is about. But I kind of was living in what you would traditionally think of as like the suit and tie, mahogany walls, fancy conference room, most overlooking a wonderful view of a city that you see in a movie. That was kind of my life day in and day out. And I was told throughout my life that meant that you made it, that if you got there, everything's great, you should be super happy, then you just stay there for your life and grow your career and, happily ever after, like they say in the wonderful fairy tales, right?
Right.
And, about 3 years ago, actually more, it was in 2015. So 3.5, 4 years ago, I started to realize that there was a bit of a crack in the veneer of that perfect fairy tale that I wasn't able to kind of patch up with trying to follow a food blogging life that could make up for the lack of kind of passion I had in my job, or going to different events, or getting really involved in charity. I was trying to find all these different ways to fill my cup that wasn't getting filled at work. That didn't really work out so well. And then I stepped out and I decided to kind of change my career. And right now it feels like a baby step, but at the time it felt like a life-altering thing and a big risk. I decided to step out of this corporate behemoth feeling of like, I am under this brand that everybody knows. I am safe. I am secure financially here. And I moved into what I thought was kind of a smaller business, took on a marketing role there to kind of start everything, which is cool and exciting to stretch my wings. And then almost immediately realized that the culture there was pretty rough. It didn't really align with my values. There were a lot of aspects of my previous professional career that I took for granted. I took for granted a lot of kind of professionalism and a lot of kind of systems and structures that were in place from a company that had been around for a while.
Right.
And so when I talk about that, I talk about like nice little operational systems, right? But I also talk about systemic issues like racial stuff, definitely some gender-based commentary, and some would call likely a level of discrimination. And luckily it happened kind of early. It's kind of like if you're dating someone and they show their cards on like date 3, you don't have to date them for 3 years to see what's going on. That's kind of what happened in that role. And so I kind of stepped out and decided from that was my kick in the pants to go start my own thing. And again, now feels like it was a much bigger step than moving into a smaller company, but launching my own business, I launched a marketing consulting business. So helping small and medium-sized businesses tell their story and share their voice. And I called it Story and Voice. So very cool experience, nerve-wracking, and even more so now that I'm kind of in the next iteration of entrepreneurial life. I went from the marketing consulting role to realizing that when I gave myself the time and the space outside of working for someone else, I realized there's a lot more that I was meant to do, that I was passionate about. And in my own self journey, started working towards becoming a women's leadership coach. And in that same process, I actually started diving a little bit more into other aspects of my identity and aspects of what had me feeling as though I wasn't heard or understood, or I couldn't actually show up as a full part of myself. And so I started doing some certifications around diversity and inclusion, and actually facilitated a lot of tech companies here in Boston with initially a very gender focused lens. But, inherently when you start talking about inclusion isn't just one bucket of an identity. Once you open that and you open the kind of the practices, you realize that there's a whole lot more there. So that's kind of where I am now, working a lot in the space of empowering people to show up as their full selves, especially in spaces that it can be really hard to do that. So empowering individuals to do that, and then working with larger organizations to create an inclusive space to allow people to show up and allow their companies to thrive. And I'm super excited to kind of continue doing that in as many ways as possible. And I like to do it in probably different ways than others do. I'm happy to kind of be the first doing it in a weird way.
Gotcha. So was it kind of, because you talked a lot about kind of being other and trying to fit into all these different categories. Do you think that part of having that uncomfortable experience is what kind of pushed your passion to do what you're doing right now?
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, you make a lot of sense. I think I have spent so much time kind of suppressing that feeling of discomfort to fit in. I use this a lot, but I feel like there was a lot of my time spent twisting myself into the pretzel to fit the mold that everybody else felt comfortable with. That right. Once I kind of decided I was going to step out of the hustle of the everyday, I've heard that kind of the corporate world comes to be somewhat of a hamster wheel, that like you get in that wheel and you're hustling and you're just literally going out in circles. That when you get to step out of that and see, oh my God, there's more to the world than the little space in front of me that I'm trying to reach that I can't get to, that it kind of opened me up to understanding, oh God, okay, I'm feeling this, other people are probably feeling this, and I need to really get an understanding of where I'm coming from and how the platform that I am living on, right? The privileges that I've had in the world, the experiences I've had in the world, and really the pain and the scars that I've had in this world, how those can help me fast track that for other people to kind of understand, one, they're not alone, and two, there are things you can do to make your life a more authentic and whole one for yourself.
Wow, that's an amazing gift that you're willing to give to other people.
Oh,
so
wow.
Why call it Checkbox Other?
Well, it's so funny. So one of the things as a marketer that I would do for clients that are trying to figure out a name of their company or a name of whatever, right? Naming a program, is I have people just kind of take a Google Doc or a journal, right? A page in your journal, and just have that page dedicated to writing down words that align with, or feelings that align with, what you're trying to bring to life. And one of the things that I was trying to figure out and do was try to figure out, how can I use my voice? Because I knew one of the things that had happened was I had suppressed my voice so significantly in a lot of the spaces that I was in, that I needed to find a space and an avenue to do that. And as I was trying to come up with names for what my blog would be, or my whatever, I actually didn't know exactly what the forum would be, but I was like, okay, what is an experience that I feel like, as I am called to talk about different topics, what's the common underlying piece to that? And I would say a big part of this is that feeling of not belonging, or being unsure if you're the only one, or if you're quote unquote crazy, right? Which, come on, there's a part of this that when you say the words out loud, it feels silly, but when you're feeling them in your body, it's such a true guttural feeling. So that I was trying to kind of capture this feeling of like, the more I started to understand myself, the more I realized that there were causes for why I was feeling what I was feeling. And I really wasn't this unique, shiny object that's experiencing imposter syndrome for the first time. But trying to capture kind of what it felt like to not fit. Felt like when I was a little kid, there's all those forms you had to fill out. There's like a certain number of boxes for your last name. And I remember always thinking, what if I had a long last name? How would it fit in there? But getting down to the different boxes you'd fill in about your identity, right? You'd fill out your gender, you'd fill out your age, you'd fill out a whole bunch of things. Then you'd end up filling out your quote unquote race. And initially there were only like 3 or 4 options I remember, right? It was like you're white Caucasian, Black African American, and Hispanic, I believe might have been there. And then there would be an all-encompassing other. And then as the years went by, they added Pacific Islander and there was a Hawaiian, but there was never anything when I was younger, as I was figuring out my identity, that actually fit who I was. And I could only check one, right? Like, so if I wanted to choose white and Black, I couldn't. So I found myself constantly defaulting to other. And in that experience, it wasn't a positive one. It was like, okay, well, I guess they don't care about that.
It sounds kind of a very unsettling experience to
And they
constantly
don't
just
belong.
have to check other. Yeah.
So, and I really do think we all, no matter who we are or where we are striving for some sense of belonging. So I feel like that's kind of the shared human condition part of things, as I started to really explore why I felt like I didn't fit in a corporate atmosphere, or why I felt like this happily ever after I was supposed to just lock into and be happy with didn't work for me. And then I started realizing there's this universal part of feeling othered, whether it be something as overt as a checkbox on like a census form, or it being that you are given 2 choices on something where your real answer is a third.
Right.
And it's not really there and available to you. So really, Checkbox Other, to me, the podcast itself, is creating a space for there to be more expressions of what the options truly are, rather than other being this all-encompassing bucket of kind of isolation. And there is, in that sense, it feels a bit negative when you're like, well, you don't even care to know what other is. I'm just kind of pushed to the side.
An afterthought.
Yeah. And nobody cares to actually understand what it truly is. So I think a big part of the podcast is to create a space for there to be more stories about the fact that we all share the experience of feeling othered in some way, and expressing what those true stories are. Because I'm sure there are people that have my experience that I just shared about checking a box, literally when you're filling out a form, or maybe you didn't have, your name wasn't fit, or maybe especially in 2019, we talk about gender, right? And we talk about sexual identity and gender identity, and we only had male and female boxes, right? So there can be something so concrete as a form that you fill out, but there are a whole lot of other things that don't necessarily fit in a written sense, but we feel them within our bodies and we know the experience, and there's something really familiar about that.
Absolutely. So I feel like you've already kind of touched on this, but fun to follow up.
Yeah.
What can listeners expect to hear with this new podcast of yours?
So my plan is for this podcast is a bit of a bit of an experiment to not follow. You'll hear that I don't like to follow the rules so much. That's something I've learned about myself, but to not necessarily follow the prescribed version of how things are supposed to go. My goal is to bring in as many really cool and interesting people to have conversations with about the aspects of their life that feel unique, the aspects of their life that feel different, the times in their life where they have felt different and how they've handled that. People across the board. I will say probably initially it's going to be a lot of women, just because that's kind of in my space, and what I'm really interested in hearing more women's stories. I feel like a lot of the stories we've heard and grown up with have been either centered around men or written by men about other people, and specifically white men. So I think, if you think about the history books that we read, there's a part of history that the person with the power in writing that history is the person with the pen. So really creating more space for there to be other storytellers telling their story and perspectives across the board. So initially, I think listeners can expect there to be a lot of kind of feminine voices and perspectives, but my hope is to really stretch the expectation of what you think of people from a picture or a name or a bio, and really understand the core of who we are as people, and really at the end of the day understand that we are all more the same than we are different.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I'm hearing a lot of themes of just trying to get a whole picture and not distilling everybody down to just a little box or a little descriptor word.
Exactly.
So that's really amazing.
I think we live in a world, and we are a species that operates from being able to categorize, like survival, right? There's a lot of survival aspects that you need to fight or flight it. So we are inherently beings that are programmed to categorize. And sometimes when we don't really use mindfulness in any way of why we're categorizing and what we're categorizing for, or have we left anybody out, we create a very kind of polarized world.
Because everybody's then focused on, well, you're not in my box, so clearly you
Right.
don't understand, versus, like you said, we have more in common than not. So if we can focus on that, then we can actually have conversations with one another.
Yes. I wish I could do the little snaps that you do at a poetry reading. That's what I tend to do, but you can't see me, so.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
Is there another time that stuck out to you where you felt like other? I feel like you've given a lot of good examples, but is there one that you wanted to share with the listeners?
I mean, there are a whole bunch of different things. I mean, I can give very kind of specific lived experiences for me. I mean, I'll stay on kind of the racial side of it because it's definitely something that's very much in the societal consciousness right now. So like racially, I mean, it's been something that my whole life has been happening. And I can pull out a couple of examples that might make sense to folks that definitely have anchored a little bit in my experience and things that I find myself working through all the time. So I should also mention, if you're listening to me, you're not necessarily seeing me, so you don't necessarily know what I look like, but feel free to look me up. But I am what I would say. I've lived a life where I can pass as white. So I'm a white passing kind of biracial woman. And that has come with some really interesting kind of invisible identity dynamics where there are experiences that I've had where people don't 100% like know who I am or what I am or where to put me. So there have been a lot of kind of stumbles in an attempt to do that. And so I say that as a caveat. So one of the experiences that I had was early on, not as early as when we met each other, but probably in like 5th or 6th grade, which was, I think it was in 6th grade, when your elementary school is when they all kind of came together in a middle school dynamic. So it was people that had never
what a
met.
fun time that was.
Oh my goodness, right? I remember lunchtime. I had gone to school for, how old are you? So 10 years, kindergarten through 5th grade, with people that knew me, knew my parents, knew some part of me, right? And I go to this new place, and I remember this girl walking up to me who I had never met before, and she came up to me at lunch and said, "So, are you going to sit with us, or are you going to sit with them?"
Ooh.
And I was like, "Huh?" And she's like, "Are you going to sit with us, or are you going to sit with them?" And the us was people of color. So it was people that were Black, it was people that were Hispanic, it was people that identified themselves as, I guess you would say, the minorities in the school. I actually think that was the word that was used, or them being the white majority, right? And I will say it was something that like kind of shook my foundation, because I grew up thinking that people wanted to be colorblind. Martin Luther King happened, so we're all good, right?
Right.
And that was one of the first experiences that I felt like I wasn't able to really be true to myself, because I was given two choices and neither of which were the absolute of what I wanted. I was like, but can I sit with you guys when can I come hang, and can I sit with anybody at any time?
Why can't we all be friends?
Right. But, there are reasons that kind of colorblind and us being all together and best friends doesn't always work. And I didn't understand it at the time. And so having to choose my whiteness or my Blackness is kind of one of those moments where I was like, but I don't know. And I want an option 3, right? I want an option 3, whether that be, I want an option 3 of, I want to sit with Nikki's friends, and Nikki's friends can be whatever color that is, because I don't really, that doesn't matter. Or that option 3 can be, I am me and you can come sit with me, And so I don't think as a kid I was that developed to understand everything that was going on. But I remember leaving, and I would say that I probably cried. I'm not sure if I cried in front of anybody, but I felt so confused at that moment. So that's just one kind of experience of racially feeling like I didn't fit in a box, and I was being asked overtly. So not just in a form, right, where there's not another human's eyes looking at you, but this girl walked up to me on one of the first days of what formatively we're all pumped full of hormones and a hot mess anyway, and saying, "Who do you want to be friends with? How are you identifying yourself?" And I wasn't prepared to make a choice either way. And in not making a choice, I think I kind of ended up in the white passing crowd, which in a lot of the work I'm doing now, by not vocalizing that is a choice in itself. So yeah, I'd say that that's at least one experience that I had that kind of othered me a bit. I would love to hear from you. I mean, just being a little bit of an other story junkie, I'd love to kind of hear, is there a time that you have felt kind of other, or that you didn't fit into a mold?
I think the first time that I really became aware, so I grew up in Vermont. It was predominantly white people that I grew up with. So the first time I really became aware of categories was around that lovely middle school time, but also high school, where you're trying to figure out those annoyingly stereotypic high school cliques. Where do you want to fit in What kind of life do you want to lead, by what crowd you want to be identified with. And I remember just having that really strong resistance to that and not wanting to pick one, I guess, and not feeling like that adequately defined me. So I just kind of remember, I don't know why I had such a strong resistance to that. And, from an outsider's perspective, I'm sure you could have plopped me in one of those lovely cliques or
Right.
cliches. But from my perspective, I, worked kind of hard to bounce around two different groups and to I guess, not spend too much time in one of those defined groups.
Yeah.
Which kind of has its own disadvantages too, right? Because I was kind of more hyper focused on that. So you lose out on opportunities to get closer with people just because
Right.
you don't want to be associated with one particular group. So that's my first time that I really thought of categories and where do I want to be. And well, I don't want to be defined by that. So that was my first experience.
It's funny because I wonder in that too, it's like what you were just saying of the closeness, right? I feel like that's a part of, I don't know if you're a Brene Brown fan, but she talks a lot about belonging.
Yep.
And when you are in a group that you do naturally fit into, that it doesn't, there's a difference between fitting in and belonging. And to really identify with a group and get to know a lot of people that identify as the same as you without trying to fit there, there is kind of this sense of close belonging and like close knitted dynamic that you can't manufacture necessarily. But when you're trying to fit in, you're trying to kind of create that. But it's that whole feeling of like pulling a muscle, trying to shape yourself into a mold that doesn't fit.
Right, absolutely. And also on the flip side of that, if you're so focused on wanting that belonging or wanting to be a part of, you might find it in people. And I think I did find it in people, but then sometimes you realize if you're focused on, well, I don't want to be defined by this, then you kind of push away and you don't take advantage of that feeling and realize how unique it is to have that person feel so unique and belonging to you. So just looking back, which I never realized until you asked me, looking back, I do see how it is when you focus on certain things, you lose out on some opportunities that you don't realize how precious are to you.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I was an athlete. I remember being like adamantly against in college living with other athletes.
Yeah.
Because I feel like when you're saying like I made a conscious choice not to fall into any of the cliques. This is in high school. I'm supposed to act like I'm an adult at this point, right? In college? Sure. Yeah. All my adult decisions were in college. But I feel like when you're rejecting that so hard, I will say now, I don't have the relationship that I would have had with my teammates or with the other kind of athletes in the community at Bentley, because I was trying so hard to be, I'm not just defined by this one piece of who I am. So yeah, I think you touched on that perfectly.
So, and I also wanted to say, just in general, the fact that you are willing to, you have the courage to face all of this, meaning, the women's leadership and diversity and inclusion, when you felt other, when everything that has inspired you to kind of do Checkbox Other. I just want you to know how it takes an amazing amount of courage to actually distill everything down into this tiny little nugget of the core theme to everything. I just think that's really impressive. Something I wanted to say earlier, but
I'm blushing.
Yes.
Oh, you're too good to me.
So what have been some of the big defining personal obstacles or the big bumps in the road, like I talked about before, in your life?
Okay. I've talked a little bit about kind of the safe ones, I guess. So like my career path bumping me around a bit. I think growing up a child of divorce is one that I'm exploring a lot more now. I mean, I think it's really interesting. We look at Gen X and millennials and like that we were children of a pretty significant percentage of divorced families. I should say millennials more so. But when I was growing up, I don't remember there being that many kids whose parents are divorced. I had two friends that I went to after school with, like an after school latchkey is what they called it. And so I think, at that time, relative to their parental experiences where their parents hated each other and either, used their kids as a ploy for one another, or one of their parents completely and utterly disappeared. When I was younger, my parents got divorced mostly before I can remember it all. But I always felt and was told by my friends and by the outer world that like I should be so grateful that my parents were friends and that the dynamic was such a friendly, loving one, which let me not like I'm going to own the fact that I would take that. If those are the two choices, I have my parents like spitting fire at each other or being kind to each other and not really acknowledging me, not understanding why there is such a fissure in something that's supposed to be forever. I would take friendly. Give me friendly all day. But what I'm realizing now as I get older is that I never got a chance to really process and understand why the two foundational human beings that brought me into this world after I was at that wonderful station with you, why their familial structure didn't stay intact. And so it's been a really interesting thing to really allow myself to dive into it without judgment. Self-judgment is something I am a master at and working really hard to kind of unpack and leave those bags behind. But I will say that I think that there's a part of that foundational element of my familial structure as a young kid that is a bit of, Tony Robbins does those like you walk across fire to get to the end and feel and understand your strength and understand yourself better and overcome whatever apprehensions there. I feel like I'm kind of teetering at the front level of walking across that firewalk, that I know that there's some stuff in there and I've already started kind of working through it. But that's one of the things that for me, it's really important for me to find partnership and build a family of my own. And I think in order to get a full holistic picture of that, I really need to understand kind of the very early stage of how kind of a break in that family dynamic impacted me. Let me also add, my family post-divorce is delightful. My dad remarried when I was 10. I think I'm right. Yeah. And I have a wonderful sister and two brothers that I'm going to start crying over here that the world would not be what the world is without them. So, and my stepmom's amazing. And if I had never met my stepmom, I never would have met you. Like, come on. So there's so many aspects of, yes, that fissure is something that I really want to explore, but I also very much am so grateful for the reality that's kind of played out and to understand how those two things go together. So that's one challenge. And I would tell you that if you would ask me to prep this ahead, I don't know that would be my answer, but it was my answer right now. So yeah, that's kind of one of the fireworks I'm going through. And then I'll add one other very kind of internal one, not necessarily other people. I touched a little bit on the self-judgment, but really self-compassion is something that I'm learning. It's something that I'm sure, it's in the dictionary, I'm sure, but like, it's something that was such a foreign concept for me to like take care of myself. Like I would take care of a friend or a family member or my brothers and sisters. Like I just didn't understand that I could do that for myself. So I've always been like a big harsh critic and there's a comfort that I've had in being the first and hardest critic of myself. So really flipping the script on that is one of the big challenges that I'm facing every day.
Interesting. Well, this might be the therapist in me, but what are the things that you have worked on changing about yourself?
In the kind of self-compassion vein, I've really worked to silence the internal voice that tells me that I'm stupid or I'm dumb for something I'm doing. So like really slowing down I see a coach. I should say this. So I have brought really great people in that I can trust and can help me with this on this journey, because I think there's something so important in hearing voices that encourage you and can act as that kind voice in your head next to the one that's super judgy. So that you can place that. So I have a coach and a therapist, and I have wonderful people in my life like you that are willing to call bullshit on that inner critic. And I think that's a really important thing to have and to cultivate. But I will also say, so if you can't necessarily, or you don't necessarily have people that are willing to kind of join you in the arena and punch down that bully in your brain, one of the things I've done is I've kind of gotten into, and I'm not going to try to act like I'm all professional at this, but getting into kind of a more of a mindfulness setup. So through meditation, through really slowing down the movie reel to full on slow motion. That's what my coach tells me to do when we're in a moment of heightened emotion, to like really understand what's going on, what actions are being taken, and take ownership back of what the situation is. So I found that that's been really helpful in the self-compassion journey, in really also understanding the women's leadership lens that I've been working in, of why our corporate systems don't really serve women and didn't serve me. Instead of being like, oh, guys suck, which I do not believe. It's really slowing it down and saying, okay, what about this experience is inherently something that women are experiencing more than men, and what part of the system is creating that issue, and how can we support those women in that moment, rather than saying, oh, it's a boys club. Because I think that, it's a boys club is an easy write-off to this stuff. So really kind of slowing things down and detaching a little bit. You can't see my hands, but I'm literally giving myself some space physically and just allowing it to move, the emotion not down and away. I used to shove it down and be like, screw it, just deal with it, buck up, not that, but moving away a little bit to feel the emotion without feeling like you're in the middle of the battle, that you're defending yourself in it too. So I feel like those are kind of a couple ways I've done it. And my hope, honestly, in this podcast is to talk a little bit more about, as I start talking with people that are challenging what the other is or that are doing really great things in this world, to really understand different techniques and tactics on how to overcome challenges, big and small, internal and external.
Right. And I think taking on that role, stepping back and kind of becoming an observer in your own experience helps you. I think humans are creative and curious in general. So it helps you take that process versus just shutting down and not having a conversation or not even trying to even have the effort to come up with a solution. So I think that's wonderful that you've started working on that.
And one of the things that I use as kind of a cue to myself, I should say that like I found either one word or small phrases to like kind of jolt myself back into reality around things, is autopilot.
Yep.
So autopilot for me is kind of that feeling of shoving it down, or just what I also like to use is kind of Stepford wiving myself, right? Putting on the smile. The house is on fire, but I'm going to make you cookies. Everything's good if I just continue to act like things are great.
Keep moving. Yep.
Yeah. Keep moving. The hard stuff, push it to the side. You'll deal with it later or not at all. If you don't deal with it, it'll probably go away. That's how I've operated for 33 years a lot of my time. And that hasn't worked. The house is still on fire. The cookies are burnt. It is not working. So that's another kind of.
Most of us function that exact way, which I would argue is why we're in the status that we're in, just as a nation, as humans together. So it's really cool that you are willing to put in that work and to, again, face yourself and face everything.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse. The marketer in me. I think the reason I fell into marketing at all is because I am somebody that I get so freaking excited about the things that I like or the things that I find helpful or the things I'm passionate about, and I can't not shout it from the rooftops. And this self-work, though it's such a like vulnerable, pushing your soft underbelly stuff, I find like if I find something that I think will help other people, I can't help myself. I need to tell people about it because I don't want, if there's any way for me to stop their suffering or shortcut some of it or short circuit some of it, I want to do that. So it's wonderful and it's wonderfully helpful, you know, if I can, but also at the same time, it's kind of like, girl, slow down. So yeah, I want to tell everybody as much as I can about something great that's happening or some great thing that'll help their life. But I'm learning, you know, again, one of the challenges that I didn't really fully mention is I'm learning how to set the boundaries with myself to understand what is appropriate to share with the world and what I should keep close to me and my close group of people that have earned the right to know and be part of this experience, that have stuck by my side or are showing up and doing their part alongside me, or even, you know, sisters and brothers in that same struggle that are willing to show up in that space rather than just showing it out to the world and letting anybody have it or have an insight into it. I think that's for me in particular, I felt like there's a lot of my life that I have marketed other people's successes and not really focused on any aspect of my own. So the more I start sharing my own personal stuff, the more it was important for me to understand whose response matters. That not everybody again, my coach, she's delightful. I'll bring her up again. She always asks me who's in the bleachers, right? And who's yelling from the bleachers. They're not in the game, right? But they're watching the game from afar and they have something to say. Who's in the bleachers? Who are you listening to? Why are they there? And really understanding whose critique and who's cheering or who's shit talking you're actually listening to and why.
So kind of moving back to all these lessons that you've learned about yourself and what you are facing and just kind of taking on. I love how you said that you have learned a new foreign concept, which is self-compassion. What kind of have you learned to love about yourself?
Oh, well, I have, this is really hard for me. What I have learned, the best way for me to learn to love myself, you're experiencing my way of deflecting really quickly right now, but I've learned that the best way for me to even hack my brain that doesn't allow me to like myself is to think of myself outside myself. So it's the same distancing. It's the same kind of separation of being able to really observe the things about myself without the full judgment or the full body emotion of it, really allowing myself to understand and care about myself like I am my friend next to me that I have no problem being caring towards. I really, what I do love about myself is that I really see people. Whether or not I want to, I do. My mom, I remember there was always, there was this moment. I was probably either just graduated from college or, a couple of years after that. And we were going through the toll booth and, we pulled up and, this is before Easy Pass was what everybody had or that the tolls still existed. Now they're all gone. But I would always pull up, stop, have my change in my hand. So I'd be all ready to be efficient. And I'd turn and I'd look to the person and be like, hi, how are you doing today? And it would, and it wasn't an attempt to like freak them out, but sometimes it would freak them out. They were so used to people not even looking at them, not even seeing them shoving their change and like keeping their hand out the window without looking at them. And there is something so inherently part of me that like, I want you to be seen as a human being. You are just as valuable as anybody else. And I will say that it can be somewhat exhausting. You've been to a restaurant with me. I feel as though like any server, any person that's pouring my water glass, I need them to know I see them and I appreciate their existence. And so while there is a draining part to it, which I am learning with boundaries and I'm learning with kind of self-compassion of how to recharge myself, that particular part of myself, I think is something that I can't really tell you where it came from, but I know it's there and it's been reflected back to me by multiple people that it's something that's unique. So I'd say that's
absolutely.
That's kind of the biggest.
It's funny because it's not expected by people, right? I mean, I started chuckling to myself because I can picture you and your mom at the toll booth and you being so proud of yourself that you've got the change and ready to roll, but that you want to have a conversation with this person and make them be seen. And the first thing I thought is there's a ton of cars backed up behind you guys. And it's just not expected. It's not routine. So it causes a little kink in the system, which is really great. I think we need more people in the world like you to put that fun kink and meaningful kink in everybody's life. But it's funny to picture you guys and the loads of cars behind you.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, it's so interesting because I actually do feel like it's the same kind of thing. So the whole like, how are you doing? Right?
Yeah.
Fine. And if you respond, you're like, wow, I can tell you this right now, like this just came to me. But if you talk to any person that I worked with at Bain Capital, every time I'd walk in, they'd be like, how you doing? I'd be like, so sweaty. Like people just want it. Like, I mean, an elevator with a stranger, how you doing? I'm like, oh, super hot right now. Oh God. And they'd be like, oh shit. And you can't, it breaks you of that autopilot. Right. And I don't even think I never purposely did it. I was just being honest because I was worried you'd see my upper lip sweat. But like, you break that norm and it automatically makes people human. It automatically takes, because they're not ready for it. And also not in like a sociopathic, I'm going to fuck with you way, but we are not robots. We are human beings. We are individuals. It is okay for me to be super sweaty right now. Is it okay for you not to say fine? Right. Or not to have to not ask that question at all. It could be something completely different. But there is something that I don't know why or how all this stuff started. I thrive on the ability to actually connect with people, even if it's in 2 seconds. Sometimes that makes them think that we're best friends from the moment we meet. But I'm just sweaty. Bottom line, that's all that's really happening here. But I'm glad that we got to be humans together.
What kind of lessons do you feel like you've had to learn over and over again? Because it sounds like you've been on quite the journey of just self-discovery and trying to understand the world and make sense of everything.
Well, the perfect answer to that is that you should, like, one of the things that I keep telling myself, again, if I'm distancing myself a bit, is that I need to trust my gut. It's something you hear so much and it becomes so diluted. Trust your gut, trust your gut, trust your gut. Well, who the fuck is my gut? Right? I've got all these voices in my head. I've got the people on the bleachers. I've got all this. Where is my gut in all this? I've lost my gut because I've learned how to go and do what is expected of me. I've learned how to be the model citizen. I've learned how to get all A pluses. One of the things that I remember in school was like you'd have those open answered questions. Like you'd have everything and then you had to free write. But the teacher really wanted a specific answer from you. And it's like, well, if you want my interpretation, don't mean that my interpretation has to be yours. I do think that what ends up happening a lot of times in schooling, and I'm not going to get on a soapbox about our education system because I don't think I'm fully versed in the ins and outs of it. But I do think there's a part of this that if we're expected to have one right answer, there is no room to be human. And there is no room to hear your gut because you're really just learning the script that everyone wants you to hear. So personally, trusting my gut has been a process that has been going on my whole life. But the funny part is until about 3 or 4 years ago, I'd only notice my gut in my mind when it would be telling me I told you so. When I had suppressed it, followed what was supposed to happen, and it happened like I thought it was going to, and I beat myself up. So my gut was kind of beating me up in my mind, even though that really wasn't what it was. That's kind of how I thought my gut and I had a relationship. And so when I got out of that path and decided this is not working, I started, and again, mindfulness, I started meditating. And in the meditation, it was beautiful. There was this Oprah and Deepak do these 21-day, Deepak Chopra, Oprah Winfrey. They're not my best friends, though. I wish they would be. I should use their full names. They do these 21 days experiences, and they had one about the power of attraction. And it happened right around the time I decided to give myself a bit of a sabbatical earlier last year. And it was all about attracting the kind of energy you want in this world and understanding how that attraction can pull or push people away and what it can bring to you. And one aspect of the initial part of that was really finding your authentic voice and self inside your brain. And I think there was a part of me that was like, yeah, be authentic, blah, blah, blah. Like everybody, that's the word right now. But really, it helped me clear out the other voices, even if it was for that 10 to 15 minutes silence. It took a long time. It wasn't the first meditation. Oh, there you are. I've been missing you. It took 2.5 weeks for me to start understanding, oh, that's the voice. Oh, that's my gut. And then really being able to fine tune that frequency and say, okay, one, I can hear it. And two, this is what happens in my body when I'm not listening to it. So I think trusting my gut has been probably the biggest one, and one that I'm constantly learning. Even as I get better at it, it doesn't go away. The one other piece that I'll mention to this is the universe. I never really thought the universe was a thing. I was very cerebral. I was very mind, body, and soul, whatever. Body's an engine to get me where I need to go. And soul, that's cool for the people that are religious, great. But what ended up happening was my mind was overcompensating and actually hurting me. And so when I finally gave space to understanding back last spring, about a year ago, actually, my whole body physically shut down because I was suppressing all of the clues in my body. And I was just trying to rely on my mind to get me to keep going. I was doing 5 different part-time jobs, which would be about 20 hours a week. I was putting to and really not getting much payment or reciprocation back. And my mind knew how to do it. My mind could map it. My mind could strategize it. And my body was like, girl, I'm out, and shut down. So that was a wonderful way to say, all right, got to pay attention to that. And then the soul part is once you start opening yourself to the fact that there are other powers that be around you, or there are other dynamics of attraction or elements of, I guess, karma's part of it, all that. Once I opened my mind to the fact that the universe could be telling you something, the more beauty that came into my life, but also the louder the things that I needed to deal with became. I would know, okay, you need to trust your gut. I'm just going to push it aside. And then some other problem that would be the exact same theme would come and smack me in the face until I decided to pay attention to it. So I think that once you start doing this work and you start seeing things that feel a little inconvenient and you might want to still kind of autopilot push it to the side, the thing that I've learned is that the universe wonderfully will make you have to deal with it one way or another. So you could either take a step back and go back to autopilot. Would be very difficult to try to pretend that you didn't learn what you learned, or you can really step into the fire with that stuff and work through it.
One thing you mentioned before that just caught my attention, again, as a therapist, is you said that meditation was kind of learning. Do you feel like you've learned to clear the negative voices out, or now they just pop up and you say, hi, I notice you, and don't give them the attention that they want but don't deserve?
I'd say number 2. And really, I'll give you my little metaphor / analogy, whatever. I use these words the same all the time. But I actually use the voices as passengers in my car, and my car is me in my life. And for a lot of my life, the judgy, overly protective, smart, very cerebral, all that was driving the car. Had the wheel, had the navigation, veered the potholes like it wanted to, super aggressive, whatever. And there were some other voices in the back raising their hand or asking for directions or saying they needed to pee, right? They needed to pull over to the bathroom, but I wouldn't listen, or I would listen when it was good for the driver. I always think of that. What is that movie? Inside Out. I always think of Inside Out and how in that movie there are all these emotions that are actual characters. I think of those identities within myself and how I process the world as those little guys. There was, the anger guy, even though I wasn't an anger necessarily person, but the really strong, bully of sorts was in the front telling me how bad I was at what I was doing and keeping me in line, really being really strict. And then the collapse, the person that would just surrender and be like, this is too hard, I gotta go, you take whatever you want, was there. And as I started to move them back, they're still there. Like right now, they're still there. They're in this interview. I'm sure I've edited myself multiple times for that. And while it would be delightful to say, see you later, get out of the car, you're not welcome here anymore, they still come back. And to really believe that you can get rid of those parts of yourself, they're there for a reason. I think giving myself the generosity of understanding they're there, and that self-destructive part, like there is a very big protective part of that. Yep. And so understanding how can I leverage the fact that that voice really wants to protect me? How do I understand? How do I need to be protected? Where do I give them the agency and control in my life that it'll be beneficial? I can't give it to them all the time because they're going to run me into a wall. But there are times where they actually are beneficial. It's not, I need to make a whole new version of me. It's, I need to change the volume on the different parts of who I am.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you came to that conclusion and could speak about that, because it's unrealistic to think that we could clear out all those negative voices, because like you're saying, they do serve a purpose in some ways, just to call attention to them, but it doesn't mean you have to do what they're saying.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I could go on for a million years about this stuff. I think there's one other part to it that's like the whole shadow and light of them. So a lot of in the women's leadership work that I do, coaching individual women, when you start to identify those voices or those beliefs that are telling them that they are all or nothing, or everything's always this hard, or they're really bad at math, or whatever that may be, right? Whatever stereotype or whatever, what we call limiting belief they've lived their narrative by, once you start kind of dissecting that and understanding that that actually comes from a place of both darkness and light, that there is a part of that belief that has something good in its intent. And there is a part of it that's the shadow of it. And so the funny part is when you actually shine a light on the shadow, it doesn't exist anymore, or it doesn't exist as strongly. And so being able to really sit with the uncomfortable part of saying, like, you're really mean to me. Why am I mean to myself? Where's that all coming from? What am I saying? And literally listing that stuff out. Like I have a whole journal entry that's literally all the wonderful things that and by wonderful, I mean the opposite, that my mind has said about me, or that, that particular passenger in my car has said about me. And the power of those words was so much stronger before I wrote them down. Mm-hmm. Once I wrote them down and read them out loud, and I read them to my mom, I don't know if I've read them to you, but like reading them is just, it takes so much power away from them. Like,
exactly. That's what I was gonna say.
No one's ever going to love you is one of them. Like, holy crap. Are you kidding?
Right.
Like I'm talking to someone right now that loves me. Right.
Yeah.
Like, there are these things that you could convince yourself. I mean, it's kind of cult-like if you think about it. If you start listening to that, you end up drinking the Kool-Aid of whatever that bullshit is and don't listen to yourself. Mm-hmm. Ooh. I'm all hot right now about that.
So it sounds like the way you not keep yourself in check, but keep yourself on this moving forward, positive life path, if you will, paying attention to the voices and not giving them the power that they're asking for. Is there anything else that you do to help yourself?
I think it is a loaded question. And I think it's something that I'm learning every day. And again, if you're listening and you want to find any version of this that's telling you to go get a manicure or pedicure, feel free to go to Instagram and search hashtag self-care. I mean, there's a whole lot of those, but I think that the conversation about self-care has shifted. It's not, oh, I need a glass of wine, or, oh, I need a vacation, or, oh, I need somebody to rub my feet, which are all good. I mean, trust me, give me all those things, right? That's fine, but that's not going to solve my problem. Those are all kind of deflectant, avoidant ways to handle it. Mm-hmm. What I've done in my own care, which isn't for everybody, and I'm very aware, is to play into the light sides of those passengers in my car. Mm-hmm. So like that driver initially, the one that's like super, like wants all the information, needs to be right, needs to be certain, needs to have been the best and the brightest and wherever. And if you're not, we'll tell you that you're not. That particular part of me, I have fed it with so much information. I have read/listened to books because I am an audiobook listener more than I am a reader. I've taken a lot of diagnostic tests. So I've used a lot of kind of concrete data to kind of alleviate that. And I felt that that's actually, though it's been a lot of energy and work, it's actually on the other end of it filled my cup back up, if that makes sense. So it has helped dull the pain that particular voice tends to cause when left running rampant. I will also say a huge part of my self-care routine is going to therapy and to speaking to my coach. having people that will help me figure out the stuff that I've started to uncover myself and not allow me to go off in too many tangents, but help shape and guide my journey, I think has been a really big part of self-care for me, especially as if I look at the list of the words that I write about myself, even in a positive way, one of them is independent. So I've been extremely self-sufficient in a lot of my life. And I think that if you were to ask me in an interview as what I call my old version of myself is corporate Nikki, if corporate Nikki were to interview with you and you'd ask me one of my strengths, I'd say I'm super independent and self-sufficient, which is really great at work, right? It's really great for an employer to hear, oh my God, great, I won't have to handhold, especially if they think their own prejudice around millennials, which is a whole nother conversation. But self-sufficiency and independence in certain experiences make you in your own echo chamber. And they make it so you actually can't connect with other people, you can't partner with other people, and you can't move forward. So really having my therapist and my coach who aren't part of my family, don't know me, but are on this journey with me and are invested in getting me to reach the goals that we've set forth has been an incredible thing. And I know a lot of people with therapy, and you obviously, you know this, but there tends to be a societal stigma around therapy. And I'm so glad that there are more people speaking out about it, because I have been in therapy since probably right around the time we met, actually. And sometimes the therapists have been great and sometimes they've been terrible. But it's been such an important part of who I am as a person, because I will tell you there were parts of my life where I was told that I couldn't cry. And there were parts of my life that I was told that like life is harder somewhere else, so just buck up and deal with it. And if I continued on that path and didn't have a person to talk to, I know I'd be a very different person today. And this kind of self-exploration would be, I'd be much further away from my authentic self than I am now.
Mm-hmm. Well, a therapist and a coach, their role is so unique that you can't find anywhere else. It's somebody who's objective in your life and can take those steps back and doesn't have any other interests involved or
they're not skewed in any way. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're objective, but yet they have your best interest at heart. That's the focus of it. Just trying to help you, but they're objective.
They don't have any stake in the game. That's perfect. Yeah. I mean, and I think that that's why, like, I try to explain to people, I've been coaching for a very long time, whether or not I knew it. A lot of my friends are like, oh, will you be my coach? And it's like, no, because the best part of this is that I don't have any bias to what's happening if I'm a coach for people I don't know. Right. I'm coming to the table trying to get you where you need to go, not to try to get you to come out with me next week or not to try to get you to do anything, whether I know that's what I'm doing or not. There is another aspect of the relationship there that makes it really difficult to be objective as a therapist. Your rules are a lot more strict than mine are as a coach. I know that that's pretty important to you too.
So what are the things that you are not willing to put up with internally or even externally?
Well, the internal one, I think I've said it like 7,000 times, so I apologize. Yep. I got a little ahead of myself, is that self-destructive voice and self-destructive language. I read this book called Taming the Gremlin, and I actually read this one. I didn't listen to it because they didn't have it audio when I was looking for it. And it was about really understanding the different voices in your head. And that was how I got that list I was mentioning before of all the things that this wonderful voice is saying about me. So that's been really helpful in really identifying actual script that I use that is on repeat in my head. So that was really, really helpful in identifying we don't do that to ourselves anymore. Sorry. Because what I have learned is there's a part of myself that's great with black and white thinking. And I don't mean racially. I mean all or nothing, very polarized thinking. So if I use that and say, we're not going to talk to ourselves like that anymore. Like I'm not willing to negotiate that. It can lock into, oh, we're not doing that anymore. Great. That's something I can focus on. But it's really saying we're not being mean to ourselves anymore. Being able to like hack into that particular part of my persona and clear out that language. It's kind of like when your parents said, we don't swear here. It's kind of like that idea. One, it's the language that I've used in my brain. But the newest thing that I'm doing the last few weeks is when I do something like, oh, that was stupid. And I like say it out loud. It's like, I didn't even notice I was doing it. I've actually in the moment been like, oh, dumbass, or like, oh, it's so stupid. I've changed it and been like, well, that was really silly, or whoopsies. Like that's the language I've switched to, because without even realizing that, it's just a little tiny paper cut every time I say something like that. So trying to shift that and not allow myself to do that internally. And I guess we could say externally, because it actually comes out of my mouth. And then the external part is I've realized the things that I'm not okay with. And one of them is the response to hard things from people or from systems or places as that's just the way things are. Those are the rules. That's the way it's always been done.
Yeah.
It is what it is. That to me, it was something that I didn't realize until I started paying attention to my body, that it was something that literally made my body shake. When I hear it now instead of the body shake, I actually get super excited because I'm not willing for that to be an answer. I'm not willing to put up with that as my answer anymore. I'm going to start asking more questions. If you look at my report cards, that every single one is, she's a talkative one. And it's because I'd like sit in the front row with my hand up anytime I had a question. But that's kind of what I'm doing now, and very, very purposely doing it, because what I've seen and what I know to be true is that these systems don't work for everybody. And these systems are something that we operate in on our own brain, that we think because I'm a girl, I do this, and or because I'm a woman, right, I do this, or because I'm American, this is what I am, or because of this is where I live, this is, all these things are just the way it is when you live here, or just the way it is when you present as this. And the more you can ask why, and really, if you think about little kids being like, but why? It's a little bit of that, which gets super freaking annoying. But when you have to answer those questions, you start realizing that some of this stuff is all smoke and mirrors. Yeah, soapbox, I'm getting on it right now, is a lot of it's just supporting the power and privilege structures that we have in place in our society. So once you start actually pulling back the Wizard of Oz curtain, it's really hard to sit and be fine with, oh, that's the way things work. Cool, great, I'll just keep going, mindlessly, continuously going in the system that's not working for me or working for Joe Schmo around the corner.
Right, and it's meant to stop the conversation. It's meant to stop the questions so that things can keep it the way it is, so that change doesn't happen, because in their minds change is scary and not welcome.
Exactly.
So speaking of change, though, what's one thing you would want to change about the world right now?
If I could change the world, and I'm not, see, I'm already editing myself. If I could change the world, I would change the systems we have in place. Systems like patriarchy and systems like capitalism. And not that I'm saying blow up our capitalistic system, and not that I'm saying all men suck. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that these particular systems are set up in a way that the power dynamics have become so egregiously imbalanced, and have left so many people behind, and have suppressed and oppressed so many people, that if I could change one thing in the world, I think if we changed our systems to be more inclusive in that sense, it would actually solve a majority of our other problems, if not all. I had a conversation on the podcast She Geeks Out last year, and one of the things that we talked about was patriarchy. And normally when you talk about patriarchy, it ends up being, yeah, screw the patriarchy. And one of the things I said was, it's not a patriarchy to matriarchy. My goal, in my brain, if I could change the world, it wouldn't be make it a matriarchy. It would be create a space where we can all step into our full selves. Not that women rule the world because men ruled the world, or not that we need to go from capitalism to socialism. It's really understanding what the needs are of our community, of our population, and really taking the time to understand that sometimes, yes, the people that have been empowered might have to give up a little to have everybody exist in this space. But it doesn't mean that we need to take the hate from one place and move it to another, or take the oppression from one place and move the oppression somewhere else. It's more, how do we get rid of that oppression by actually seeing every person you meet and understanding that they are a viable human being and giving them the space to live.
Absolutely. And just willing to have that open dialogue.
Agreed. Yeah. And being willing. Here's one other thing. I don't know if this is something I love about myself, or I don't freaking know. But I have never felt like I am the smartest person in the room, nor do I think I know everything. And I think there is something so beautiful about being in a conversation where nobody's trying to do that or be that. Because it gives you space to actually learn from each other. And we are operating right now in a society of, I have to have an answer for whatever you ask me, and I have to have it perfectly polished, and I need to know everything and have all the data in the back of my mind and ready as an appendix to pull out, or I need to just shut you down. I think if we actually came to the table and said, I'm here to learn, and I understand that I have a whole bunch of baggage, I understand I have a whole bunch of biases, and I understand that I have a bunch of privilege. Every person in this world has some version of privilege. Coming to the table without trying to defend those and just sit there and hear and listen, I think is really important. The reason that I'm trying to do this podcast as a podcast is because I think that what happens right now in a lot of these conversations is that they're happening in unconscious bias trainings at work, at family dinner tables, in, friend groups, on social media, all of these places where you feel the need to have an immediate response and you want to be right and people are judging you and it might implicate so many different aspects of your life. And it doesn't give you the opportunity to take a beat and really
Right.
let things land and absorb and really assess, how do I really feel about this? Or what don't I know?
Mm-hmm.
And where can I learn more? Instead of being like, no, you're wrong, I'm right. No, I don't even hear what you're saying because I'm thinking so hard about what my next answer is going to be before I ever listen to you. So I do think creating a space like a podcast, and this is kind of a big way that I coach, is really giving you space to take some time and reflect and understand and learn where you're coming from and why you think the way you think. And if you gave yourself the time to slow down that movie reel, what values-based decision would you go ahead making?
Right. And giving yourself the time to respect the process, because
Yes.
anything worth changing, anything worth addressing is going to take time to actually make a lasting change.
Yes. What's the lesson you have to learn again and again was one of your questions.
Yeah.
It's patience. And
Mm-hmm.
I've built that muscle a little bit, but it's never been my strongest one. Patience is part of this process and the opposite of kind of how we operate right now, right? We have this instant gratification culture. And so patience isn't one that we're so used to.
Well, and I think you just touched on a really funny thing too. Think of patience as a muscle. Just because you get it extremely strong and you've focused on it for a while doesn't mean it's going to stay a hard muscle forever. You have to continually test it and improve it, and it's a process. That's for sure.
Heck yeah.
Well, I think it's amazing what you're doing, and I love how you have the courage to face things head on and really take on the difficult, uncomfortable feelings for people and for yourself, but to use that as a means to help change things and for people to just feel better about themselves and more comfortable
Yes.
with themselves.
Well, thank you for saying. I wish you could see me. I'm shaking my head. I can't take a compliment for anything. I'm so happy that that's what's coming through. There's been a big part of me that's super nervous about coming out of the shadows as the marketer and the support staff and the manager to make things look beautiful and make things work great for other people, and stepping out and saying, I'm ready to use myself as that vehicle for other people to learn. I have had a fear of coming off as self-centered or narcissistic in it. And so any way that I can share my story and be a benefit to other people, not a benefit to myself, but truly, like, if I can share any part of my life that will help you feel better about yours, I'm going to try to do that, again, with my boundaries, really trying to use myself as whatever I can do to help other people kind of get to where I am in past, of really just self-acceptance and hopefully making a world where we're all just much more kind to ourselves and each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, what are your intentions for this podcast this year?
So in the next year or so, and definitely through this podcast, my goal is to really step into myself and allow myself to use my voice to help other people, but also use my voice to call out the way things are that are really not the way they are. And to create a safe space for a community of people who are really here to do the work and to step into kind of this more connected way of being, to create that space, to create a community for people to realize they're not alone in that hope. I hope they're not alone in that hope. That means I'm alone in that hope. And really allow us to explore these things in a really respectful way together. I am very aware that we do not agree on all things, and life would be super boring if we did.
Yeah.
So like creating that space for safe conversation, and really, even if somebody is completely opposite of your understanding of the world, there is some way for you to find connection. And so modeling, my hope is in this podcast, there's a way to model connection through disagreement, that we don't always have to agree, but we can find humanity in the values that we do share as people.
Mm-hmm.
That is my intent. Always, I'd like to say, but specifically through this podcast, is to showcase that there are so many different shades and varieties of people, but really at the end of the day, there's a lot of commonality there.
Absolutely. Well, I personally look forward to hearing it all.
I look forward to you coming back. I hope you will, and I can ask you some questions. You've been so delightful in asking me them. Well, Meg, I'll sign us off by saying huge thank you. I know that this is your week off, and you gave me a good chunk of time, so I am so very grateful for it, and so very grateful for you.
I'm just happy to help in the process.
Thanks, Meg. Perfect. That giggle is the best way to end this first episode. We did it. I am so glad you made it all the way to the end. I hope that means you liked it and that you'll stick around for future episodes. So be sure to subscribe and follow me on social media to see when new episodes come out and all the other great stuff going on that I'm going to be shouting from the rooftops. I'm so excited to have you here as part of the community. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.